Okay, this is session 7 on your research and your dissertation, and this session is on data handling. So you've been out, you've collected the data, you've assimilated it in some way, and now you're going to start processing it to try and find out what you have found and then analyze what that means. Okay. If you've been taking quantitative analysis, you will have numerical data, which comes in two ways, descriptive or inferential. Now, descriptive statistics are very simple. You can do them on a calculator, and simple calculations can be made. So things like 70% of the people I interviewed said X, 9 out of 10 said Y. One person said this, although not common, it was still an important point that needed to be made. If you're going to do inferential statistics, you do need some more talent and some more understanding of how you manipulate the numbers. Now, inferential statistics means you're looking to make a difference more often than not between one group of respondents and another group of, I said respondents, I should have said participants, between one group of participants and another. So, for example, you might want to look at the gender split. You might want to look at something to do with age. You might want to do something to do with experience. You might want to do something to do with subject specialism. And what you'll need then is you need the statistics to work in a way which make a distinctiveness between one group and another, and see if there is a distinctiveness which is of any significance. And these are complex mathematical calculations which can be very, very important in terms of showing whether something is significant or not. They are complex though, so it may be, if you've been collecting data from people in a questionnaire, your simplest way to answer this is to look at descriptive statistics. If you've been collecting qualitative data, what you'll find is you have a mountain of stuff. Okay, typically you may have had conversations with people, you may have recorded those, audio recorded or video recorded, and you've got a mass of stuff. So I did 50 interviews in secondary school over a period of about 5 years, and by the time we got them transcribed, I had something like 450,000 words to analyze. And that's after I'd asked the people who were doing the transcription to remove all the stuttering, repeating the same sentence, starting the same sentence 3 times. So you end up with a mass of stuff. So what you're going to have to typically do is to data reduce. Okay. So as I've made the point, qualitative methodology means up with a lot of stuff. So you need to find a way of reducing it so you can recognize patterns, themes, and regularities. Okay, now these are the way in which they characterize inductive analysis. In other words, you are inducing something from the data you have, or you will be inducing, and you're looking for patterns, themes, and regularities. So to get there, it's sometimes it's worth doing data reduction. Okay, so I said there are 4 stages to that. The balance between raw data and usable data, and the 4 parts are convert, clean up, code, and classify. Okay, so we'll now go on and talk about what we mean by convert, clean up, code, classify. Usable data, convert means put it into a workable format that can be verified. So if it's in an audio format, can you put it into a textual format? Now, a word of warning about transcripts. They take a lot of time, and they say more often than not it's about a 7-to-1 ratio. So if you do an hour's interview, it takes you 7 hours to transcribe it. I would advise against doing total transcriptions. What I would do in the first instance, if you've audio recorded, I prefer audio recording obviously because I can talk freely with people, then I don't have to make notes, and I'm very poor at doing 2 things at once. So listening to people, talking to them, I would then listen to the recording later and I would make key points out of that rather than transcribe everything, because you have to be honest, most of what gets transcribed never gets used. Okay, and I've talked already about the way in which we can reduce that data, and I'll come back to that in a while. Okay, but firstly it's got to be converted into a workable format. More often than not, turn audio material into text. Take out what's unnecessary. Okay, you don't need to have, as I said, people stuttering, saying the same sentence 3 times. You don't necessarily need, unless you're a specialist, whether there's a dog barking in the background, or whether someone moved a chair, or whether they coughed, or whether there's noise in the street. What you're interested in, more often than not, is what people had to say. So it's quite legitimate to take out something that's not going to add to that. So if they start the same sentence 3 times, fine. Find out what they wanted to say and report that. Then you go into the business of coding. And this is where you take qualitative data and quantify it. Okay, you're actually saying what you saw in the following categories, which is another way of talking about coding, is X number of people out of Y number of people felt like this. Okay, so one of the things when you're reporting data, you don't go into the business of saying some people said, a few said. You actually say things like 4 of the 7 respondents indicated, 7 of the 10 participants said something along the lines of. So it gives you a way of coding and classifying. Now we'll talk about how you code in a few minutes, okay? And the last thing is classify, which is where you get those codes you've developed and cluster them together, which give you a theoretical theme or concept. And this is the process known as axial coding. As I mentioned more than once, read the chapter I've written on analysing qualitative data. So when you're developing codes, there are 3 basic types. The a priori code means it exists. You're expecting to find something, like you've found something in the literature that suggests that people will be acting in certain ways. So you're now testing this in your conversation to find out whether this is the case in reality. Okay, so they're the a priori codes. You expect to see them. Then you will have what's called emergent codes or open codes. You don't know what's going to be said, and you aren't closing down the conversation. If something emerges that's important and you consider it's important, then you start to code accordingly. So for example, when I was doing my work on head teachers moving into role, the word mentoring never existed in most people's response to what I did. But what I saw was people talking time and time again about the support they got from another person, either a colleague or someone who'd been in post for some time in another school, another situation. And it became obvious that there was this aspect of mentoring going on. It was described in very many ways, but it's what's called open codes or emergent codes. So you expect things to sometimes emerge which you hadn't anticipated, which is great. There are some warnings about how we manage that, but we'll come back to that. And then you might have what's called in vivo codes. In other words, these are words and phrases that emerge from the text. If this is that's great. It's like, say, for example, I'm not familiar with day-to-day practice in schools these days, in state schools in the UK, but a lot of people talk about something called Progress 8. Okay? Now, I could put a word search in, or a search of the text that says Progress 8, how many times did it mention, and in what context, and on what reason was it set. So these are codes that emerge from the text, okay? So you do develop codes in order to be able to chunk your data into things that can be then showing what it is you are trying to show. So here's an idea. I was doing head teacher induction. Okay, in other words, how do they get to make the transition to being a head teacher? Okay, and when I did my first set, which is the outside of this memo or mind mapping exercise, I came up with lots of codes about the guidance offered to people, which manual, frequently asked questions, online support, a dedicated advisor inspector, a non-teaching deputy, a business manager to support staffing. You can get the picture. To support training, there was finance, budgets, personal issues, legal issues, one-to-one support, blah, blah, blah. So what I ended up was the various individual codes. There's 3, 7, 10, 12, 16 individual codes there. Actually developed down into 5 themes: guidance, staffing, training, one-to-one support, and time. Okay, and then I report my time accordingly, or report the findings accordingly, according to that mind mapping exercise. So you've got qualitative data. With quantitative data, you would have spent ages making sure that everything was valid and reliable. You can't do that with qualitative data. You've got to find ways of making it trustworthy and authentic. Okay, so trustworthiness consists of 4 things, and they parallel what we would do in quantitative work, which is validity, generalizability, reliability, and objectivity. What we're looking for in this quantitative data is credibility, transferability, dependability, and confirmability. So you're saying that the data you've got are secure because they are credible. In other words, they actually match what we'd expect to see in the field. They seem transferable. You would expect to see similar things in certain situations. So if you go to one primary school and saw practice, you would not be surprised to see something very similar in another school. They're dependable in terms of you can see them where you want to see them, and they are going to be in that way parallel to reliable, and they're confirmable. And one thing you've got to learn with qualitative data is to make sure that people agree with your interpretation of the qualitative data. That's what we mean by confirmability. Authenticity, okay, it's saying that we are looking to see that through both stakeholder testimony and an audit trail of fairness and authenticity, we are actually being faithful and keeping the data secure. So the 2 words trustworthiness and authenticity come from a couple of researchers called Lincoln and Goober. Sometimes they perform as Goober and Lincoln just to make life difficult for you. But Lincoln and Goober are the key factors in trustworthiness and authenticity. You can't write a dissertation where you've collected qualitative data without talking about concepts of trustworthiness and authenticity and demonstrating those. Okay? So that's the end of that slideshow, and I think we just got one more to go.